Hello and welcome to the Problem Gambling Podcast. I'm Barry Grant, an addiction counselor with Extern Problem Gambling. And my co host is Claire Dunnigan, an expert by lived experience and the project lead of Empower Her Recovery Network. And we have a very special guest today, AnneMarie Caulfield, who is the CEO of the newly established Gambling Regulatory Authority of Ireland. Anne-Marie, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today and agreeing to have a chat and answer some questions for us. And most importantly, for our listeners, many of whom will be very interested in learning more about what the GRAI will be doing and what it will be able to do. So I'll just jump in with the
Sorry.
questions if that's okay. I mean, just starting off, could you tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit about your own background and what motivated you to even apply for this role within the GRAI?
So, in terms of my own background, I'm originally from County Mayo. I've been in the civil and public service since I was 18, a long time ago now. I've a very broad experience in the public service. So, I've worked in everything from EU matters, North-South matters, HR, public expenditure and regulation previously as well in the Residential Tenancies Board. When I saw this job coming up, I thought it'd be a really worthwhile thing to do to be involved in the regulation of gambling. I know in terms of the harms that it can cause, and I felt for a startup, I had huge experience that I could bring to the sector. And obviously, regulation of a sector, effective regulation is important from the perspective of consumer protection and from the perspective of a fair and level playing ground for companies who respect the law. So that would certainly be our aim.
Brilliant. And for the listeners who may not know what the regulator will be empowered to do or what responsibilities they would have, could you tell the listeners a little bit about? I know there's a lot in there. As somebody who lobbied for a very long time with the various forms of the Gambling Regulation Act as it is now over the years, there's a
Mhm.
lot in there. But if you could give us the headline stuff that might be most relevant to, say, a person who gambles.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're responsible for the regulation of gambling. So that'll be betting, it'll be gaming, and it'll be lotteries. It's both on site and online. And we've responsibility both for business to consumers, which is obviously the listenership you mentioned, and also business to business. That's important too in terms of the way that a product is, for example, programmed and so on. That those consumer protections are built in there. So we'll be beginning with licensing. We'll be rolling out compliance with the legislation and a strict regime as well of enforcement. We've an education awareness mandate, and we're already actively involved, for example, in research. We'll be setting up a gambler exclusion scheme, a national exclusion scheme, and we'll also be establishing a social impact fund. There's a number of other things like money laundering, sports integrity, and so on that we're also responsible for, and obviously the usual corporate responsibilities that any agency has. And that's sort of a whistle stop tour of our role and our remit.
Yeah, and for those of you who have a lot of time in your hands, you can look at the entirety of the Gambling Regulation Act. There's a lot of stuff in there, but that was a very good kind of summary of, I suppose, the important points from the consumer's perspective. Um, and what a lot of people might not know, and I only learned this over time through doing some very, very grueling and not always the most interesting lobbying work over the years, is that when a piece of legislation gets enacted, there's a whole heap of stuff that happens after that before it's actually operational. Uh, would you be able to explain a little bit about that? And would you have roughly, I know that a lot of this is completely out of the control of the GRAI, it's down to the Oireachtas and the Minister of the Day
Mm.
and all that good stuff. But would you have a ballpark rough idea when the GRAI will be fully operational? Because the legislation, as I understand it, gets fully operational piecemeal, not like in one fell swoop. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it'll be a stand. We will be standing up on a phased basis. So as the current regime, in terms of say getting a license from the revenue commissioners or going to the courts for a license for particular purposes, as that stands down and as they expire, we'll be standing up. But there's a whole series of steps that you have to take. So, for example, one of the things we're doing at the moment is a public consultation in relation to licensing. So that'll be closing at the end of this week. And we'll have to go through those contributions and see what tweaks might have to be made or changes might have to be made to our proposals. And then we have to go out to Europe. So there's a consultation that has to be done there because we have to ensure a level playing pitch for businesses across Europe as well, that we're not introducing something which is artificially blocking the market, given there's a common access to markets and free movement of goods and people as part of our European membership. So we anticipate then that process will be completed in the autumn, and then a statutory instrument has to be made to start up that aspect of our work in licensing. So by the end of the year, we'll be open for licensing, Barry, and the first number of areas to go live will be betting. So it'll be both betting on site and betting remote, and also in relation to gaming, and gaming remote or online will go live as well. So those are the first three areas. They're very big swathes of our remit, and they're also the areas that people have brought to our attention in terms of issues to do with gambling harm. The 24/7 aspect, for example, that availability right through the night is something that can cause difficulties for people experiencing problem gambling or gambling harm. So that's where we focused our attention in the first instance.
Yeah, you mentioned this is where it gets a little bit nerdy. Sorry, dear listeners, that it goes to
Sorry.
Europe and not enough, not from you, but I'm gonna, if I may, just a follow-on question from something that you mentioned there. That, that it goes to Europe, and the gambling regulation bill, as it was at the time, would have gone to Europe for a period of time as part of that process. We are EU members, but as I understand it, like there's no EU-wide regulation to say online gambling must look like this in all EU member states. Do I understand that correctly?
You are correct. It's a national competence. And I think we've reached out really strongly through the Gambling Regulators European Forum, or GREF. We've received huge support, but I would have to say it does vary quite a bit across the various countries. And I'm glad to say that in terms of our legislation, we'd be sort of in the area that would be have a very strong consumer protection perspective and protection of children, and view the regulation of gambling as public health matter. And obviously, people are entitled to run a gambling business. Nobody's trying to put people out of business, but must do so in a manner which protects consumers, protects children, and is mindful of that public health aspect as well. So I think in terms of our outreach, it's very reassuring to see where we're positioned, and we've received tremendous support. We're in the process of signing a number of different memorandums of understanding and exchange of information with other EU regulators. We've had a group out to the UK last week. We had their CEO over here nearly immediately after we were legally established. The Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, so many other jurisdictions have assisted us very strongly, and we're delighted to get their support.
Brilliant, yeah. And okay, I'm going slightly off here, but uh, you mentioned that from that EU perspective, there are some, and people, listeners may be aware of this, some smaller EU countries that are heavily dependent on gambling as a big part of their national economy, who certainly when the gambling regulation bill went to Europe previously, one of them did raise some concerns about sections of the bill at that time. Is there any possibility that could cause delays if another EU member state or multiple EU member states raise concerns about some elements of the act? Could that delay the GRAI becoming operational?
Well, we're standing up on a phased basis. So, you know, what we will be submitting in the first instance will be the applications for licensing. And then we'll start to stand up all the other provisions, you know, say matters like advertising restrictions, inducements restrictions, etc. I suppose there may be commentary when we get to those other aspects, but we would hope that we'll be up and running by the end of this year. Um, so obviously they can make comments if they wish, but we have factored some time into the timelines to allow that to happen.
Okay, good to know. Sorry, just that's the nerd in me is very curious about that side of things. Anyway, so you mentioned the social impact fund, which is very important. I mean, we have a lot of listeners in the UK. They've had their white paper recently, and they've moved from what they had for a very long time, which is the voluntary contribution model, which was, if I'm being frank here, abused by some operators. You know, there were instances reported by the Gambling Commission of some large operators sending in checks for £50 as their voluntary contribution for the year. And then you had other operators who were making substantial contributions. And it was that kind of mixed bag. Whereas they've now moved to a levy, which is this kind of social impact fund model that we're going to have in Ireland now. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about what the social impact fund is meant to do and what that would look like? Or I know the legislation says it'll be a percentage of, I'm not sure if it's turnover or profit, but it'll be a percentage of money coming into gambling companies that they pay out as a levy. The percentage will be decided, I think, by the minister of the day.
That's
So I
right.
don't know what that is. But when the fund is operational, what's it going to do? How's it going to help people?
Yeah. So a couple of things. You're quite right. It is the minister who decides the percentage of the levy. That said, in exactly the same way as we've done, you know, projections for our own operational costs, for licensing costs, for ongoing costs of licenses, annual charges, we've also done some work in terms of the social impact fund. That's part of the work that we've been doing over the last while to make sure we're operational, will be operational as quickly as we possibly can be. So we will be pushing some proposals to the minister. Really want to say that we are out at the moment. We're asking for input from a wide cohort of people, including those with lived experience, including those whose you know, loved ones have experienced problem gambling and gambling harms in the past. And we really want to hear from you because we will be putting together that proposal and submitting it to the minister as part of that decision-making process, just to advise the minister as to where the needs are and where the money can be best spent. The legislation sets out that it can be spent in areas like research, education and awareness, and also in treatment, in areas to do with treatment. And then it says in other areas as may be decided, you know, in due course by the authority and the minister. So it's fairly broad. And, you know, we will be putting together that proposal. We would hope to start collecting funds from licensed entities next year and to put out a call for proposals either late this year or early next year to be able to disperse funding as quickly as we gather it. I mentioned to you that we will be standing up our different license types in a phased basis. So obviously the fund will grow larger as we progress and as we cover all areas of our role and our remit over time.
Brilliant. Yeah. And just on that, I think the public consultation, the broader one, I know this, you mentioned the one for licensing, but the other one is also open until I think the 15th of May. Maybe do I have that
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
It is
So,
indeed call for inputs. Yeah, and we really do encourage people, please, to engage with that. We really like to hear your views.
yeah. So that's on the website www No, it should be
GRAI.
www.grai.
Yeah,
Nobody does the
dot I.
W's anymore. Just type in grai.ie and it's
Yeah.
all there. I think it's on the main page. There's different consultations there. Please do, if you're listening to this, because it's really important that the GRAI get as many diverse views as part of that process as well. Claire, I'll hand over to you the question about the Fresh Start principle. Could you explain what that might be?
This is coming very much from the lived experience person on the call, I suppose, AnneMarie. But
Mhm.
yeah, it is something I've wondered about because, so for a lot of people who it's absolutely fantastic that we have this happening right now. But like myself and a lot of other people out there, we've already gone through this and we're at the, recovery stage, but that's not that doesn't mean our lives just are fantastic afterwards either. We've a lot of
Mm.
work to do in the background. So like for me and a lot of people I talk to, actually, one thing that is a huge issue is the debt factor, and that's how that looks from a central bank point of view. There is no forgiveness there, or any way of getting your own, I suppose, your own background across to them, really. I know you can
Mhm.
put in 200 words, but I don't know who actually looks at that. So, I mean, my question would be, is there any room for the GRAI to actually speak to financial services or come up with some principle that is, easier accessible for people to get finance after they've had a gambling addiction, because it's a massive issue.
Yeah, so in terms of our outreach to date, we have reached out to the central bank. They've assisted us a lot, for example, in terms of licensing. In terms of the area of gambling harm, they're working with us and with the Banking and Payments Federation to assist people who are experiencing gambling harms to block payments from their accounts to gambling companies. So to assist them in that respect. And we also have reached out to the MABS, the Money and Budgeting Service, again in terms of people experiencing financial difficulties with regard to gambling harms. We haven't taken it any further than that yet, Claire, but certainly I think when we set up our lived experience panel, which we would hope to do very shortly, we've been reaching out to other regulators that have a panel already in place in terms of working up terms of reference and seeing what works well and what they would have done differently. That might be something we could explore further at that point. So, but we are sort of reaching out to the central bank and to other agencies with regard to the financial aspects, albeit that is at early stages at this point.
Yeah, of course. And at least it's good to know that that conversation is happening, because like I could say, when I was in the depths of it, I was actually too scared to go to MABS because I was afraid of that judgment as well. So even having that easier access where it's like, it's okay, like we can help you, or we can start a conversation this way, because it is a scary thing to talk about, especially when you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. So, I mean, it's good to hear that. Absolutely. So thank you for that, AnneMarie. I'm going to stick on the lived experience for a second, if you don't mind. But
Of course.
like, at Extern, we've always had that as part of our education and harm prevention. Lived experience is a big part of that. So is there going to be a role for experts by lived experience in the delivery of the gambling harm prevention education, do you
Yeah,
think?
absolutely. We would very much like to set up a committee of individuals with lived experience of gambling harm. We've done very extensive outreach. Obviously, you've assisted us greatly, and we're very appreciative of that. But there's other groups as well, in terms of, say, Gambling with Lives, and then particular individuals who've come in and spoken to us about their experience, and have spoken at different events for us. So, and even in terms of our own staff here, we have an event coming up shortly, which is really fantastic to just keep everybody focused on what is it about what's the objective really? Why are we all here? So I think that has to be front and central, that lived experience, and certainly that is something that we would aim to do. And we're trying to do it in a number of different ways. So, for example, we've reached out in terms of the curriculum for second level students, and we're delivering, developing a module there. We've reached out to the Union of Students of Ireland, and they are going to, for the first time, include a questionnaire in terms of gambling in their mental health survey. And again, depending on the results of that, we'll be able to maybe assist them in terms of a program at third level, because sometimes when people, have that freedom to go to third level for the first time, that can be where problems start to develop for them with respect to gambling harms. So there's a couple of different areas that we have tried to reach out, and we'll continue to do that. And as I said, really welcome your input as well.
I think that's great to hear about the colleges. Mine started in college, all that free time. It is a big thing,
Yeah.
So I think that's absolutely fantastic to hear. Yeah, thank you for that. Barry, I'm going to hand over to you for the more nerdy questions again.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay.
No, but that is important about the colleges. I mean, we had Stephen Cashman as a guest on the podcast a few years ago now, and he did a master's by research looking at gambling among third level students, and his findings were, it was roughly 1 in 10. Now, if you compare that to the general adult population, it's 1 in 30. So it's. And you'd see it, the Gambling Commission in the UK has done good research on this in recent years as well. So that's brilliant to see that. That will be really important, and a great place to do interventions will be third level. Probably in first year, the feedback and the stories we hear from a lot of people that are living away from home, Claire and I were talking about this yesterday. You could have 12 hours of lectures in the week when you're going from secondary school, preparing for the Leaving Cert, where it's all day, every day, plus study and all this stuff. Then all this free time, maybe in a strange city, managing your own money for the first time, getting the student grant. A lot of triggers there for a lot of people. That's a great opportunity to get linked in with the USI. So back in terms of the nuts and bolts, I mean, let's say, okay, the GRAI is up and running when it's fully operational. So let's say a customer of a gambling company, would they be able to make a complaint to the GRAI? And if so, what areas will be covered there?
Yeah, absolutely. So in respect of breaches of their obligations, there will be an ability to make a complaint, and that we will, I think compliance, that whole function is extremely important. We've just appointed our Director of Compliance and our Director of Enforcement just 3 months ago, but they're already working on their programs in terms of how we'll ensure compliance and how we'll enforce against non-compliant companies and organizations. So if we receive a complaint, but we won't be just waiting for complaints to come in, because I think that's not the space we want to be in. We'll be conducting audits and inspections ourselves, compliance audits on a regular basis on a thematic approach. And then also, where we'll have a memorandum of understanding with a number of other countries, and where issues are arising in relation to certain behaviours in other jurisdictions, that could also trigger an audit here in Ireland in relation to that aspect, because it would signal a weakness in company procedures. And also then in terms of reporting, annual reporting and independent audits and independent test houses from time to time. So those are the 4 areas that we're looking at in terms of ensuring compliance, of which absolutely complaints would be an important aspect.
Brilliant, yeah, and it's great that you mentioned that memorandum of understanding. I used to, I've dialed down on the social media stuff in the last few years because I just don't have the patience for it. But when the Gambling Commission will give some very large fine to some multinational online gambling company 4, 5, 6 years ago, I would post that up on our social media and pose the question: this company operates in Ireland with no oversight. what are they doing here? If they're getting this very large fine for all these failings in our neighboring jurisdiction, what are they doing with their Irish customers? Because it's the same model, it's the same business, it's probably the same headquarters, probably the same product, identical product with no oversight here. So I think that memorandum of understanding piece is probably very important, and the proactive piece that you mentioned, the auditing also, but also consumers would be able to make a complaint if they had some concerns or some complaint to make to the GRAI as well as part of that compliance piece. So that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We would hope to collaborate closely. As I said, we've already received huge support from other regulators across Europe. As you rightly say, we have a lot in common with some of them in terms of the operators, and indeed in terms of some of the sporting traditions as well. And so where weakness has been identified elsewhere, I think that is, that should trigger for us the need to go out and inspect to make sure that same weakness or the same breach isn't happening here in Ireland.
Brilliant. And okay, outside of people who are customers of gambling companies, like if I'm a member of Joe Public and I see some gambling advertisement, say on TV or radio, that is outside of the watershed, God, I'm forgetting words now, outside of the watershed time, or we'll touch on social media later, but let's say that one as a hypothetical. Could I, as a member of the public who's not a customer of a gambling company, make a complaint to the GRAI? Is there a remit there?
Yeah, so that would be a breach of their license condition. So absolutely, you could make a complaint to us. But I suppose we'd be proactively monitoring that anyway. We've also a good working relationship with Commission Amman already. Again, we'd hope to establish a memorandum of understanding with them. We hope to obtain a trusted flagger status with them soon. As a public body, where if we bring something to their attention, they'll act on it quite quickly for us. So we're deepening that relationship. They're helping us a lot in relation to particular areas. Also, we have an agreement at the moment, even in place in relation to Advertising Standards Authority. So even as things stand at the moment, there is a code of practice there that people can make complaints to them, and they've handled quite a few in the last year. So,
mostly from me.
Mostly from you.
I'm joking, but I'm not joking.
They didn't disclose the source, Barry. Just the outcomes and their processes. So there's a lot happening here, and there's a lot delegated to the 7-person authority as well. So, for example, in relation to the frequency of advertisements, in relation to the warnings that have to attach to them, and so on. That those are matters which they can introduce further restrictions on licensees. So they've started to look at this area. Obviously, they've a huge amount on their plate at the moment, but it is an area that they'll be working on over the coming year.
Brilliant. So you mentioned warnings there in reference to advertisements, because at the moment the advertising standards say it must tell the customer it's over 18's product. They must have a responsible gambling message, which is usually please gamble responsibly, which is kind of meaningless. And they must direct viewers or listeners to a source of information about problem gambling supports. I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much the ballpark of it. Now, none of those things are warnings. Would you expect that there would be something akin to, when you say warning, would it be something akin to a health warning? Or sorry, I'm picking you up on that, but maybe I've misunderstood it. Could you clarify on that?
No, not at all. So the legislation does set out, in terms of the number and the frequency of advertisements and so on, and the warnings that much attach. But it doesn't specify specifically what those would be. So I suppose we've taken very much an evidence-based approach here in the GRAI. If you look in terms of the research that we've done with the ESRI, in terms of the extent of problem gambling, in terms of the impact of children if they begin gambling before the age of 18, and we've a number of further studies coming out now. So I suppose in terms of what the warnings would be, Barry, I think we should take the same approach. So conduct some research, do some public consultation, consult, as broadly as we can, and then put together a package which would be effective. Rather than, I might have particular ideas, but I think it needs to be worked through with warrants that care and attention in order to be effective. So I'm not going to commit to anything here now. I hope you
Yeah, no, of
understand that.
course. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
just wondering broadly what you meant when you said warnings, because I know sometimes I've seen from Australia, like at the end of their gambling ads at the end of a TV on TV, instead of the please gamble responsibly, the big black screen comes up and it with large white lettering, and it'll say something like you're probably going to lose. Right? Which is technically correct, right? That's the most likely scenario, right? It's much more hard hitting than what's currently there. I'm not asking you if it would be something like that, but I'm just going to give an example of the way things are done in different jurisdictions in that kind of space. In terms of land-based, going back to, I mean, there are technological advances in land-based as well, but let's say some of the casinos, what we would call casinos in Ireland around the country, or amusement arcades, would operate things like slot machines, roulette machines, poker machines, things like that, electronic gaming machines. Would there be, you mentioned compliance earlier on, would there be spot checks on those kind of land-based operators?
Yeah, so we're currently working through the regime in terms of the standards, the technical standards that have to apply to those machines. And we're in the background putting together what those are likely to be, how we would go out and test them in terms of whether it be a test house scenario or whether we ourselves will go out and initially test them. And then obviously there'd have to be audits from time to time, on sites audits and inspections to make sure that everything is as it should be. I think in terms of that sector, there probably needs to be, in some instances, upgrading of machines and so on. And the legislation does provide where there's new standards that there'll be certain lead time there. So, there is a job of work to be done there, I suppose, by ourselves and by industry. We're starting to engage with that sector. They're engaging with us quite constructively. And although it won't be in that first swathe of licensing, we would hope in early 2027 to get to that sector and to work with them closely in advance in terms of the standards that would be required.
I think AnneMarie, with the land-based as well, though, it's important to remember there are plenty of people who don't gamble online at all and who just do the land-based stuff. And I think we forget that because of this crazy burst of online. But one thing, I've seen quite a lot of, not so much the establishments themselves or the machines, but the actual process for people to go in and self-exclude can, in some instances, be horrendous. And they can be treated quite badly. And I don't know that maybe that's down to a staff training type of thing or just how you get them on the day. I don't know, and I can't say, but I know that there are several people who've had really difficult experiences trying to do that self-exclusion. And I don't know if that's part of what you're talking about when you're looking at standards, but I think it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, so the legislation does provide that we can prescribe, you mentioned staff training, certain types of training that staff have to undergo. So that's something, again, we will be looking at over the next while in terms of, dealing with people who are clearly demonstrating gambling harm or problem gambling, and staff interventions in that regard, and a whole variety of other areas like anti-money laundering and so on, requirements on the ground. So yeah, that's a job of work yet to be done, but absolutely we have our sights on it.
And like I say, I don't envy your job at all. I think I say that
There's
to you
a
every
lot.
time I see
It's a
you.
wonderful job. It's a wonderful job.
Which,
You're the right woman for it. You're the right woman for it. Can I just ask quickly, because I know we don't have that much time, with regards to the Moses scheme, I say Moses scheme, sorry, the self-exclusion scheme, is there a potential date you'd expect that to be up and running? Because that is a big one for us.
So in the first instance, we're building our licensing ICT systems. So it'll be, I don't have a definite date, Claire, at this point in time. As an interim measure, I mentioned that we are working in terms of the exclusion scheme. That if you want to prevent payments from your account with the banks. So AIB have already gone live with that and Revolut, but we anticipate that all of the banks will provide that in the next while. They're working away in the background to do that. There's obviously blocking software as well, and many of the companies on a company by company basis provide that facility. So I don't have a definitive date at this point as to when the exclusion scheme will go live. But after we build our licensing system, it'll be one of the next things we'll focus on.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece of work. So
It is.
again,
and important to get it right. So it's a complex
yeah.
enough ICT system, but absolutely. I mean, we've contracted for it to be built with Deloitte, and we'll get it up and running as soon as possible.
Yeah, and look, it'll be a game changer for everyone, I think, once it's up. And sorry, Barry, I'm just going to ask my last question here.
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned the research. So the ESRI report that came out was again another game changer for us, because we didn't really have any up-to-date research on prevalence or what the gambling landscape looked like in Ireland. So that has been really, really beneficial. I know there's been that one that's come out about the suicide rates as well, but like when you're commissioning research to be done, like how is that process? Like who comes up with the subjects that are the most important to research, and is there a facility in the future for the public to have an input in where they think that research could be focused?
Yeah, so I suppose a couple of things. At the moment, we have a research steering group, the Health Research Board, the Institute of Public Health, ESRI, and ourselves, and we have a series of pieces of research underway. We're trying to make sure we leverage existing resources, bearing in mind that this is coming out of the taxpayer's pocket at the moment. But the Social Impact Fund will have a fund for research, for further research, and absolutely we'll be doing calls for proposals, as you say there, in terms of topics that a broader cohort consider are important in this space, and to allow them to apply for funding. I suppose maybe just to take the chance then or the opportunity to mention to you that we'll be publishing a study on inducements with the ESRI and the impact of inducement on gambling behaviour in the next couple of weeks. It's just undergone the 3 peer reviews they always do. They're so thorough in their research. We'll also be doing some research with Pobble, which will look at the prevalence of betting shops in areas of social deprivation. We have a study with the ESRI coming out later this year in terms of the consumption patterns, in terms of different accounts and different types of gambling and betting that people undertake, particularly those demonstrating problem gambling or gambling harms. So there's a couple of things in the pipeline, but I suppose where the research will really take off is where it's properly funded under the Social Impact Fund. Colleagues as well in the Institute of Public Health and the Health Research Board are looking at the areas of intervention that they can make in this space and data that they can collect. And the HSE indeed are publishing some research later this week, I think it is indeed, on interventions in treatment. So I think it is an area that there is growing awareness of. I think that people like yourself who have, had the courage to speak out about their life experiences are really starting this discussion going. And I think that people are eager to learn more about it. And all of that will feed into I think, very rich research environment. And it's something that we're very committed to, both in order to learn ourselves more, but also to make sure that the interventions that we make, that they're grounded in reality, that they're going to be effective, and that they're going to achieve what they set out to do.
Brilliant. One last question, AnneMarie, because I know you need to go back to your day job, but this is something that certainly the industry bring up a lot, and okay, I'm a little bit skeptical about it. Having said that, there is a black market, and people who use our service would access unlicensed gambling companies because, of course, there's nothing to stop them from doing that in the online space at the moment. So this kind of thorny subject of the black market, how would you see the GRAI preventing unlicensed online operators from selling their services to customers in Ireland, which of course that should happen, only, in my view, licensed operators who are have responsibilities to the regulator and, signed up to all the relevant laws and all the relevant rules should be operating and selling their services in this jurisdiction. So what would you see the GRAI doing to prevent that kind of black market from operating here?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that preventing a black market from flourishing is extremely important, and it is obviously something that companies would have raised with us on numerous occasions. And there isn't a simple solution, but there's a whole range of solutions which we're working on. So I suppose in the first instance, detection. So we have already signed a contract in terms of, scanning in terms of online activity that isn't a licensed entity, because obviously we'll have a register to check that against. I mentioned the collaboration with Question Them On in terms of being a trusted flagger. So we're doing that. We're also looking at a number of other areas, so we might be able to reach out to the social media providers and to the financial institutions as well. And these are measures which are in place in other jurisdictions. So we'd hope to get that same system in place here. In terms of education awareness, I think that's really important as well, that people would understand not to be giving their details, their financial details, their personal details to black market operators. Also in terms of collaboration with other jurisdictions and sharing that information in terms of sites that they've blocked. And then also in terms of business to business entities, and you may have seen that the UK has been quite proactive in this space. So in other words, if you're licensed to provide software to companies on a business to business basis, but you're also providing software to black market activities, that is contravening the legislation. So
Okay.
assisting in others contravening the legislation. So there's a number of different areas. There is no one simple solution, but we would intend to be proactive in this space, both from a consumer protection perspective, but also in terms of fairness, because we don't want a race to the bottom here in terms of, companies which are adhering to the legislation being undercut. But I would say to you that if you look in other jurisdictions where there is regulation, there isn't, the licensed market is, strong and growing. So I don't know that the fears in this regard are as well-founded as sometimes they're made out to be. But I do think that we can't be complacent in this space. It's important that it's a well-regulated market and that it's, restricted to companies which are respecting the law and respecting their responsibilities in terms of the protection of children and the protection of individuals experiencing problem gambling or gambling harm.
Brilliant, yeah. And this is a bit of a technical one, but for something you mentioned towards the end there, that software producers, that if they're selling their software to unlicensed operators, they are in breach of their own license. Because for anybody who's ever logged on to an online slots site, I'm not recommending that you do it if you haven't, but for research purposes, I have. There's about 3 companies that produce almost all the online slots for the world, right? Almost all of them. So, and this is why it's so easy to create these online casinos, because you can just create your front page. The back end, which is the games, is already there. You just pay your fee to these companies. So that would be a very powerful tool for the regulator to have. AnneMarie, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it. And it's great after all of these years to see that the regulator is up and running and there's a human being there, and that you've got your team there, and that the legislation is over the line, and that there's movement happening. So that's a big thing, for certainly for me and Claire, and for many, many people that we advocate on behalf of over the years. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in the future.
Thanks, AnneMarie. And thanks you, listener, for listening, and tune in next time.